The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and old magazines. Maya sat in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed designed to make you even more anxious than you already were. She'd been staring at the same poster about hand washing for the past 15 minutes, reading it over and over because her brain refused to focus on anything else. Her palms were sweating. She wiped them on her jeans for what felt like the 100th time and glanced at the intake form on her lap. The question seemed simple enough, but her handwriting looked shaky and nervous. She hoped the receptionist wouldn't judge her for it. 23 years old and scared of a simple doctor's appointment. Maya felt ridiculous. But it had been almost 2 years since her last checkup, and that was only because her college required it. Now, without her parents' insurance and working 2 part-time jobs that didn't offer benefits, she'd been putting this off for months. The exhaustion had gotten worse, though. Some mornings she could barely drag herself out of bed, and last week she'd actually fallen asleep during her lunch break at the coffee shop where she worked. Her roommate had finally convinced her to come here. The Riverside Community Clinic operated on a sliding scale, which was a fancy way of saying they wouldn't bankrupt you just for walking through the door. Maya had done the math 3 times before making the appointment. Even with their reduced fees, she'd have to skip buying groceries for a week. But the tiredness was starting to scare her. The clinic itself wasn't fancy. The walls were painted a pale yellow that had probably been cheerful once but now just looked tired. There were maybe a dozen other people waiting, and everyone had that same look on their face. That mixture of worry and resignation that comes from not having enough money to take care of yourself properly. Maya recognized it because she wore that same expression. She checked her phone. Still 10 minutes until her appointment time. Knowing how these places worked, she'd probably wait another 30 minutes after that. She'd already texted her manager at her second job, the retail store downtown, asking if she could come in a little late. Thankfully, he'd said yes. She couldn't afford to miss any hours. A little boy in the corner was crying softly while his mother tried to comfort him in Spanish. The sound made Maya's chest tight. The kid was probably scared just like she was. Just like everyone here was, in their own way. The main door opened and a cold October wind swept through the waiting room. Maya pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself. She really needed a proper winter coat. But that was another expense that would have to wait. Her college loans didn't care that she was barely scraping by. They wanted their money every month, regular as clockwork. Sorry, she heard someone say. A man in his late 50s rushed past carrying 2 coffee cups and looking flustered. He was wearing a white coat with a stethoscope draped around his neck. One of the doctors, probably. He disappeared down a hallway, still apologizing to someone on his phone. The receptionist called out a name, and an elderly woman shuffled toward the examination rooms. The clinic seemed busier than Maya had expected for a Tuesday morning. Through a partially open door, she could see staff members moving around with more energy than usual, talking in low, urgent voices. She went back to studying her intake form. Under reason for visit, she'd written, fatigue and general checkup. It seemed inadequate somehow. How do you explain that you're just so tired all the time, that you wake up exhausted, spend all day fighting to stay alert, and go to bed feeling like you've run a marathon even though all you did was make lattes and fold clothes? Maya Chen? Her head snapped up. A nurse stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, smiling warmly. She was younger than Maya expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and colorful scrubs covered in cartoon cats. Maya stood up so quickly she nearly dropped her form. Yes, that's me. Come on back, honey. The nurse's voice was gentle, like she could sense Maya's nervousness. Maya followed her down a narrow hallway lined with more of those health education posters. They passed a small break room where she glimpsed more staff members in what looked like an impromptu meeting. Busy day? Maya asked, trying to make conversation to calm her nerves. The nurse glanced back with a slightly conspiratorial smile. You could say that. Our regular Tuesday doctor called in sick last minute. But don't worry, we've got someone really special filling in today. You're in excellent hands. They reached a small examination room, and the nurse gestured for Maya to sit on the paper-covered table. The familiar crinkle of it made Maya feel like a kid again, sitting in the pediatrician's office with her mom nearby. She wished her mom was nearby now. Let me just get your vitals real quick, the nurse said, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around Maya's arm. Been waiting long? Not too bad. Maybe 20 minutes. That's good. We're usually running behind, but Dr. Hunt is really efficient. He keeps things moving without making anyone feel rushed, if that makes sense. Maya nodded, watching the numbers climb on the blood pressure monitor. The nurse made notes on her chart, checked her temperature, asked her to step on a scale. All the routine things that somehow still felt invasive when you were vulnerable and worried. "All right, sweetie. The doctor will be in shortly." "And Maya?" The nurse paused at the door, her expression genuinely sympathetic. "Try not to worry too much. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out together. That's what we're here for." The kindness in her voice made Maya's eyes prickle with unexpected tears. She blinked them back and managed to smile. "Thank you." Then she was alone with her thoughts again. The examination room was small and plain, with the usual anatomy posters and a jar of tongue depressors on the counter. Through the thin walls, she could hear muffled voices from the next room over. Maya's phone buzzed. Her roommate checking in. "How's it going? They figure out why you're always tired?" "Still waiting," Maya texted back. She didn't mention how nervous she felt, how her stomach was doing flips, how part of her wanted to just leave before the doctor came in. 3 soft knocks on the door made her jump. "Come in," she said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. The door opened and Maya looked up expecting someone old, maybe tired, looking like that other doctor she'd seen rushing through the waiting room. Instead, she found herself staring at someone completely different. The man who stepped into the room was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and sharp features that seemed almost too refined for this modest clinic. He wore the standard white coat over a crisp button-down shirt, and there was something about the way he carried himself that immediately put him apart from the usual harried clinic doctors she'd encountered before. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were warm and genuinely kind, crinkling slightly at the corners as he smiled at her. Not the practiced, professional smile she'd seen from doctors who were just going through the motions. This seemed real. "Good morning. I'm Dr. Alexander Hunt." He extended his hand and Maya shook it automatically. His grip was firm but not overwhelming. "I know you were probably expecting Dr. Morrison. He's under the weather today, so you're stuck with me. I hope that's all right." "Oh no, that's fine," Maya stammered, wondering why her heart was beating so fast. "Just nerves about the appointment," she told herself. "I'm Maya." "It's nice to meet you, Maya." He settled onto the small rolling stool and pulled it closer, but not uncomfortably so. He opened her chart on his tablet, his eyes scanning the information quickly. "So you're here for fatigue and a general checkup. Tell me what's been going on. When did you first start feeling this tired?" There was something in his tone that made it easy to talk. Not clinical and distant, but genuinely interested, like he actually cared about the answer instead of just checking boxes on a form. Maya took a breath and started explaining how the exhaustion had been building for months, how she'd blamed it on her busy schedule at first, working 2 jobs and trying to keep up with life, but it had gotten worse. The afternoon crashes, the brain fog, the way her body felt heavy all the time, like she was walking through water. Dr. Hunt listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making a small note. When she mentioned that she hadn't been to a doctor in 2 years because of insurance issues, something flickered across his face. Not judgment, but something else. Understanding, maybe, or concern. "That must have been really stressful," he said quietly, knowing something's wrong but not being able to afford to address it. Maya felt that prickle of tears again. "Yeah," she admitted. "It really was." "Well, you're here now and we're going to figure this out." He stood up and washed his hands at the small sink. "I'm going to do a basic examination, and then we'll talk about what tests might be helpful. Does that sound good?" She nodded, and for the next 15 minutes Dr. Hunt was nothing but professional. He checked her ears, nose, and throat, listened to her heart and lungs, examined her neck for swollen lymph nodes. He asked questions about her diet, sleep habits, stress levels, and medical history. All the standard things, but somehow he made it feel less invasive, less like being poked and prodded and more like someone trying to solve a puzzle to help her. "Your heart and lungs sound good," he said, making notes on his tablet. "But you mentioned feeling stressed. Tell me about that. What does a typical day look like for you?" Maya found herself opening up more than she'd planned. She told him about her 2 jobs, the early mornings and late nights, the college loans hanging over her head, the tiny apartment she shared with 2 roommates, the constant anxiety about money. She wasn't sure why she was sharing all this with a stranger, but something about his calm presence made it feel safe. Dr. Hunt didn't rush her or seem impatient. He just listened, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "That's a lot to carry," he said simply. "Chronic stress can definitely contribute to fatigue. But I don't want to just assume that's all it is. I'd like to run some blood work. Check your thyroid, vitamin levels, iron, a few other things. Sometimes there's a physical component that we can actually treat." "How much will that cost?" The question came out before Maya could stop it, and she felt her face flush with embarrassment. But she had to know. She'd already done the math on what this visit would cost. To her surprise, Dr. Hunt didn't look uncomfortable or annoyed by the question. "The clinic has programs to help with testing costs. Let me see what I can arrange. I don't want cost to be the reason you don't get the care you need." Maya felt something loosen in her chest. "Really?" "Really?" His smile was reassuring. "We'll figure it out. That's a promise." They talked for a few more minutes about lifestyle changes that might help in the meantime. Better sleep hygiene. Even though Maya laughed and said sleep was a luxury she couldn't always afford. Simple dietary changes that wouldn't break the bank. Stress management techniques. "I know some of this is easier said than done," Dr. Hunt acknowledged, "especially when you're working 2 jobs and just trying to survive. But even small changes can sometimes make a difference." There was something in the way he said it that made Maya look at him more closely. Like he actually understood what it meant to struggle. Even though something about him suggested a very different kind of life, she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the expensive-looking watch she glimpsed under his coat sleeve, or the way his shirt fit perfectly, or just some indefinable quality of confidence that came from never having worried about money. But then again, he was here, wasn't he? Working at a sliding-scale clinic on a Tuesday morning instead of some fancy private practice? "I'll get the nurse to draw your blood before you leave," Dr. Hunt said, standing up. "And I want to see you back in 2 weeks to go over the results. We'll make sure you get scheduled before you go." "Okay." Maya slid off the examination table, suddenly reluctant for the appointment to end, which was weird because she'd been so nervous about coming here in the first place. Dr. Hunt opened the door, then paused. "Maya, I know this probably doesn't mean much coming from someone you just met, but you're doing a really good job. Working 2 jobs, taking care of your health even when it's hard, that takes courage." The unexpected kindness hit her harder than she would have thought possible. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. He gave her one more warm smile, then stepped out into the hallway, already pulling out his phone to call the next patient. Maya stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. It was just a doctor's appointment. A routine checkup. Nothing special. So why did she feel like something had shifted? Why did she already find herself looking forward to that follow-up appointment in 2 weeks? She shook her head at herself and gathered her things. She was being ridiculous. He was a doctor doing his job, being kind to a patient. That was all. The fact that he happened to be unexpectedly attractive and genuinely seemed to care was just a coincidence. She'd probably never see him again after the follow-up anyway. Doctors like him didn't usually stick around places like this. But as Maya made her way to the lab for her blood work, she couldn't quite shake the warmth his words had left behind. For the first time in months, someone had seen her struggling and told her she was doing a good job. Someone had promised to help her figure out what was wrong. It was a small thing, maybe. But right now, in Maya's overwhelmed and exhausted life, it felt like everything. 3 weeks had passed since Maya's first visit to the clinic, and she'd been back twice more. The blood work had come back showing she was severely deficient in vitamin D and iron, which Dr. Hunt had explained could definitely account for her crushing fatigue. He'd prescribed supplements and scheduled follow-ups to monitor her progress. What surprised Maya most wasn't the diagnosis. It was how much she'd found herself looking forward to these appointments. She told herself it was because Dr. Hunt was thorough and actually seemed to care about her well-being. He never rushed through their appointments, always asked detailed questions about how she was feeling, and remembered small things she'd mentioned in passing. Like how she'd told him about struggling to afford the supplements, and he'd somehow arranged for the clinic to provide them at no cost, or how he'd suggested meal planning tips that worked for her tight budget, not the expensive organic diet plans she'd seen online. But if Maya was being honest with herself, it was more than that. There was something about him that drew her in. The way he listened so intently when she spoke, like her words actually mattered. The rare smile that transformed his usually serious face. The kindness in his eyes when he told her she was making progress. that she was doing everything right. "You've got that look again," her roommate Priya said one evening as they shared cheap takeout in their cramped living room. "The dreamy one." Maya nearly choked on her noodles. "What are you talking about?" "The doctor. You always get this soft expression when you talk about your appointments." Priya grinned mischievously. "Should I be worried? Are you developing some kind of crush on your physician?" "No," Maya said too quickly, feeling her face heat up. "I'm just grateful for good medical care, that's all. He actually listens instead of rushing me out the door in 5 minutes." "Uh-huh." Priya didn't sound convinced. "And the fact that he's apparently attractive has nothing to do with it?" "I never said he was attractive. You didn't have to. You described his kind eyes for like 10 minutes last week." Maya threw a pillow at her, but she was smiling despite herself. Maybe she did have a tiny crush, but it didn't matter. Dr. Hunt was her doctor, and she was just a broke patient at a community clinic. He was probably being kind to everyone. That was literally his job. Still, she found herself putting a little more effort into her appearance before her next appointment. Not too much, just enough to feel less like she'd rolled out of bed after a double shift, which she had, but he didn't need to know that. The clinic waiting room was less crowded than usual on this particular Wednesday morning. Maya had managed to get the early slot, before her shift at the coffee shop started. She'd only been waiting about 10 minutes when the nurse called her back. "You're getting the VIP treatment today," the nurse joked as they walked down the familiar hallway. "Dr. Hunt specifically asked me to grab you as soon as you arrived. Said he wanted to talk to you about your latest results." Maya's stomach did a small flip. She couldn't tell if it was anxiety about the results or excitement about seeing him. Maybe both. Dr. Hunt was already in the examination room when she entered, studying something on his tablet with a slight frown. He looked up as soon as she walked in, and that frown immediately smoothed into a smile. "Maya, good morning. How are you feeling?" "Better, actually," she said, settling into the chair across from him. It had become their routine. He never made her sit on the examination table unless he needed to actually examine her. Instead, they sat facing each other like two people having a conversation, not doctor and patient. "The brain fog is clearing up. I'm still tired, but it's not that bone-deep exhaustion anymore." "That's excellent. Your latest blood work confirms it. Your iron levels are improving." He turned the tablet to show her the numbers, though Maya only vaguely understood what she was looking at. "We'll keep you on the supplements for another few months, but you're responding really well to treatment." Relief flooded through her. "So I'm not dying or anything?" He laughed, a genuine sound that made something warm bloom in her chest. "No, you're not dying, though I imagine it felt that way when you were at your worst." "It really did," Maya admitted. "There were mornings I thought about just not getting up. Not in a dark way, just I was so tired that staying in bed forever seemed like a valid life choice. I'm glad you didn't." His voice was soft, and when Maya looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Choose to stay in bed forever, I mean. The world needs more people who work as hard as you do." There it was again, that unexpected kindness that seemed to reach right into her chest and squeeze her heart. Maya looked down at her hands, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. "Thank you for everything," she said quietly. "For figuring out what was wrong. For making the supplements affordable, for treating me like a person instead of just another case number." "Maya," he waited until she looked up at him. "You are a person. That's all you should ever be treated as. The fact that other doctors have made you feel otherwise says more about them than you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Through the thin walls, Maya could hear the muffled sounds of the clinic. Phones ringing. Quiet conversations. The wheeze of the old air conditioning unit. "So," Dr. Hunt said finally, his tone shifting to something lighter, "if we're scaling back your appointments to just monthly check-ins now, I need to make sure you're set up for success. Are you managing to eat regularly? I know you mentioned your schedule makes that difficult." Maya made a face. "I'm trying. But yeah, sometimes I'm running between jobs and it's just easier to grab whatever's fast and cheap." "What if I told you that meal prepping doesn't have to be expensive or time-consuming?" He leaned back in his chair and Maya noticed for the first time how tired he looked. Like maybe he wasn't sleeping well either. "I know it sounds like one of those Pinterest things that only work for people with unlimited time and money. But there are actually some really practical approaches." "You meal prep?" Maya couldn't hide her surprise. For some reason, she'd imagined someone like him having a personal chef or something. Something flickered across his face. I do, actually. When I'm not eating hospital cafeteria food anyway. Being a doctor doesn't leave much time for elaborate cooking. They spent the next 20 minutes talking about practical nutrition, and Maya was surprised by how much he knew about budget-friendly options. He recommended a food bank program she hadn't known existed, suggested cheap protein sources and simple recipes that didn't require expensive ingredients or fancy equipment. He even wrote some of it down for her, his handwriting surprisingly messy for someone so put together. "Sorry," he said, noticing her trying to decipher his scrawl. Stereotypical doctor handwriting. "Here, let me—" He pulled out his phone. "What's your number? I'll text you some links to resources. Recipes, meal planning apps, that food bank I mentioned." Maya rattled off her number, trying not to read too much into the fact that her doctor was asking for her phone number. It was just for medical resources. Professional purposes, totally normal. Her phone buzzed a moment later. "Got it," she said, looking at the message. Then she blinked. The number that had texted her wasn't saved under the clinic's contact. It was a personal cell phone. Dr. Hunt must have seen her expression because he quickly added, "The clinic's main number goes through a system that doesn't always work for texts. This is easier, but obviously only use it for medical questions or concerns. I'm not—" He paused, looking almost uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "I want to be clear that I'm maintaining appropriate boundaries. I just want to make sure you can reach someone if you need to." "Of course," Maya said, wondering why he suddenly seemed almost flustered. "I understand. Thank you." They wrapped up the appointment, and Maya left feeling lighter than she had in months, not just because her health was improving, but because of that conversation, the way they talked about real things, practical things, the way he'd shared a piece of himself, even if it was just admitting that he meal prepped like a normal person. She was halfway to work when her phone buzzed again. Another text from Dr. Hunt's number, but this time it was a link to an article about iron-rich foods, followed by a second message. "Forgot to mention this one. It's actually useful, unlike most nutrition articles online." Amaya stared at those two letters. Alexander Hunt. It made him seem more real somehow. Less like Dr. Hunt and more like an actual person. She saved his number in her contacts, hesitated, then labeled it Dr. Hunt, not Alexander. That felt too familiar, but she thought about those initials for the rest of her shift. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. It started small. Maya would text Dr. Hunt a question about whether a certain symptom was normal, and he'd respond within hours with a detailed but friendly answer. Sometimes he'd check in, asking how she was feeling or if the new supplements were causing any side effects. The texts remained professional, but there was a warmth to them that Maya couldn't ignore. He'd add little comments that made her smile. When she texted that she'd tried one of his meal prep suggestions and it had actually worked, he responded, "Told you so." Though I'll admit my first attempt at meal prep ended with setting off the smoke alarm. We all start somewhere. It was humanizing. This accomplished doctor, who always seemed so composed, had burned his food badly enough to trigger a smoke alarm. Maya found herself wondering what else she didn't know about him. What he did when he wasn't at the clinic. What made him laugh. Why he'd chosen to work at a community clinic when he could probably be making 3 times as much at a fancy hospital. "You're texting him again," Priya observed one evening, looking over Maya's shoulder as she responded to a message about vitamin dosage timing. "It's medical stuff," Maya protested weakly. "Medical stuff that makes you smile like that?" "Sure." Priya flopped onto the couch beside her. "Look, I'm not judging. He sounds great. But be careful, okay? Doctor-patient relationships are complicated, and you don't really know anything about him outside the clinic." Maya knew Priya was right, but she couldn't help feeling like she was getting to know him piece by piece. Through the texts, through their appointments, through small details that he let slip. Like when she'd mentioned being stressed about job hunting, trying to find one full-time position instead of juggling 2 part-time ones, and he'd said, "I understand that stress more than you'd think. The uncertainty of not knowing what's next, feeling like you're always one step away from everything falling apart." It had seemed like an odd thing for a successful doctor to say, and Maya had almost asked him about it. But she'd held back, not wanting to cross that line from patient to friend. The moment everything changed came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Maya was home alone, scrolling through her phone while eating instant ramen for dinner. She'd been job hunting all afternoon and was feeling discouraged. Every position wanted experience she didn't have or offered wages she couldn't survive on. On impulse, she opened LinkedIn to update her profile. Might as well look active and engaged, even if she felt like giving up. She scrolled through her feed, half paying attention until something made her stop cold. It was an article that had been shared by someone in her network. The headline read, "Medical Technology Heir Quietly Funds Network of Community Clinics." The photo beneath it showed Dr. Hunt, but not the Dr. Hunt she knew. This was Alexander Hunt at some kind of formal event, wearing an expensive suit, standing next to people whose faces Maya vaguely recognized from business news. The article talked about his family's medical technology company, their hundreds of millions in revenue, their influence in healthcare policy. Maya's hands were shaking as she read. Alexander Hunt wasn't just a doctor doing charity work. He was the heir to a massive fortune. His family owned Hunt Medical Technologies, a company that made surgical equipment and medical devices used in hospitals worldwide. He had a trust fund that could probably buy her apartment building several times over, and he'd never mentioned it. Not once. Maya set her phone down, feeling like the world had tilted sideways. All those conversations about budgeting and meal planning and struggling to make ends meet. Had he been humoring her? Feeling sorry for her? She thought about every time she'd complained about money, about her tiny apartment, about not being able to afford things. She'd been complaining about an $800 rent payment to someone who probably spent that much on dinner. The warm feeling she'd been carrying around for weeks curdled into something else. Embarrassment, confusion, a sense of betrayal that she knew wasn't entirely rational but felt real. Nonetheless, she picked up her phone again and read through every text message they'd exchanged, seeing them in a new light. His advice about meal prepping, his recommendations for budget-friendly options. Had he been patronizing her this whole time, playing some kind of game? Maya's finger hovered over his contact. She wanted answers. She wanted to know why he hadn't told her. Why he'd let her pour out her struggles to him when he couldn't possibly understand what it was like to worry about money. But what would she even say? "Hey, I Googled you and found out you're secretly rich?" That sounded insane, and technically he was still her doctor. She couldn't just text him demanding explanations about his personal life. She had another appointment scheduled for next week. The thought of sitting across from him now, knowing what she knew, made her stomach turn. How was she supposed to act normal? How was she supposed to trust anything he said? Priya came home an hour later to find Maya still sitting on the couch staring at nothing. "Whoa, what happened? You look like someone died." "I found out something about Dr. Hunt," Maya said numbly. She showed Priya the article. Priya's eyes widened as she read. "Holy hell. Your doctor is a millionaire? Like an actual millionaire? His family is worth hundreds of millions," Maya corrected, though the distinction seemed meaningless. "And he never said a word. I've been telling him about my financial struggles, about working 2 jobs, about counting every dollar. And he just let me, like it was normal." "Maybe he didn't think it mattered," Priya suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. "How could it not matter? Everything I told him, all the ways I've been vulnerable with him, it was all from this place of thinking we were at least somewhat on the same level, that he understood what it's like to struggle. But he doesn't. He can't. He's never had to worry about affording groceries or paying rent." Priya sat down beside her, looking thoughtful. "Okay, but he is still working at a community clinic. That article says he founded it. He could be doing anything with his time and money, and he chose that. Doesn't that count for something?" "I don't know," Maya admitted. "I don't know what to think anymore. I thought I knew him, but I don't know anything about him." Not really. She thought about their next appointment 1 week away, about having to sit across from him and pretend like nothing had changed, about the way she'd started to feel comfortable with him, maybe even started to care about him in a way that went beyond doctor and patient. All of that felt tainted now. Impossible. Maya looked at his contact in her phone one more time. At those initials AH in his last text. Alexander Hunt. A name that apparently meant something in the world of wealth and business and privilege. A world so far removed from hers that they might as well have been living on different planets. She thought about canceling the appointment. Finding a different doctor, even if it meant starting over somewhere else, it would be easier than facing him. Easier than admitting how foolish she felt for not seeing the signs. The expensive watch, the confident way he carried himself, the casual knowledge about things that suggested a life of comfort she'd never known. But even as she thought it, Maya knew she wouldn't cancel. Because as hurt and confused as she felt, part of her needed to understand, needed to hear from him why he'd kept this secret, needed to know if anything between them had been real, or if she'd just been a charity case to make him feel better about his privilege. 1 week. She had 1 week to figure out what she was going to say to him. 1 week to decide if she could ever look at him the same way again. Maya went to bed that night with her mind racing, already dreading an appointment she'd been looking forward to just hours before. The image of Dr. Hunt in his white coat kept shifting in her mind, replaced by that photo of Alexander Hunt in his expensive suit, standing in a world she'd never be part of. She'd thought she'd been getting to know him, but maybe she hadn't known him at all. The week crawled by with painful slowness. Maya went through the motions at both her jobs, smiling at customers and making small talk, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart would jump, thinking it might be Dr. Hunt. But he didn't text. Not once during that entire week, which was unusual. He'd gotten into the habit of checking in every few days, just a quick, "How are you feeling?" or a link to something he thought might help her. The silence felt loud. Maya rehearsed what she'd say to him 1,000 times. She'd start out calm and direct. "I found out about your family. Why didn't you tell me?" Sometimes in her head she was angry. Other times she was cold and distant. Occasionally she imagined herself being mature and understanding about it, though that version felt the least realistic. By the time Wednesday morning arrived, Maya had barely slept. She'd changed her outfit 3 times, annoyed with herself for caring what she looked like. This wasn't a date. This was her confronting her doctor about lying to her. Or not lying exactly, but definitely not telling her the whole truth. The clinic waiting room felt different somehow, or maybe Maya just felt different. She sat in the same uncomfortable plastic chair, staring at the same hand-washing poster, but everything had changed. She kept glancing at the other people waiting, wondering if they knew. Did they realize the doctor treating them could probably buy this entire building without making a dent in his bank account? "Maya?" The nurse with the cat scrubs appeared in the doorway, same warm smile as always. "Come on back, sweetie." Maya's legs felt unsteady as she followed the familiar path down the hallway. Her heart was pounding so hard she wondered if they'd need to retake her blood pressure. Through the open doors, she glimpsed other patients, other doctors, the normal rhythm of the clinic. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The nurse led her to the usual examination room and closed the door behind her. Maya sat in the chair, not the examination table, and wrapped her arms around herself. She felt cold despite the stuffy warmth of the small room. 3 soft knocks. Her chest tightened. "Come in," she managed. Dr. Hunt stepped through the door, and for a second Maya's anger wavered. He looked tired. More than tired, actually. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. And his usually neat appearance seemed slightly rumpled. Like maybe he'd slept in his car or worked a double shift. "Maya." His smile seemed relieved, genuine. "It's good to see you. How have you been feeling?" She'd planned to ease into it, to be diplomatic. Instead, the words burst out, "Why didn't you tell me?" His smile faded. Something shifted in his expression, a guardedness that she'd never seen before. "Tell you what." "Don't." Maya's voice shook. "Please don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. Your family. Hunt Medical Technologies. The fact that you're," she gestured vaguely, "that you're not just some doctor working at a community clinic." Dr. Hunt was very still for a moment. Then he slowly closed the door and leaned against it, not coming closer. "You found out." "I found out," Maya confirmed. From a LinkedIn article of all things. Which was a really fun surprise, by the way. Finding out that the person I'd been confiding in about my financial struggles is worth more money than I'll see in 10 lifetimes. "Maya." "I told you everything," she continued, the words spilling out now. "About working 2 jobs. About choosing between groceries and medical care. About my tiny apartment and my student loans and every humiliating detail of being broke. And you just, what? Felt sorry for me? Thought it was interesting to see how the other half lives?" "No." His voice was sharp, almost pained. "It was nothing like that." "Then what was it like?" Maya demanded. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you've been lying to me for weeks." "I never lied to you." You never told me the truth either. That's basically the same thing. Dr. Hunt ran a hand through his hair, messing it up further. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely rattled. You're right. I should have told you. I didn't know how. How about, hey Maya, by the way, my family owns a medical technology empire. That seems pretty straightforward. And then what? He pushed off from the door, taking a few steps closer, but still keeping his distance. Then you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me right now. Like I'm not a real person. Like everything I've said and done is somehow tainted by money I didn't earn and didn't ask for. Maya opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, because he wasn't entirely wrong. She was looking at him differently. She couldn't help it. I've spent my entire life being defined by my family's wealth, Dr. Hunt continued, his voice quieter now. Every friendship, every relationship, every interaction is colored by it. People either want something from me or they hate me for having it, or they treat me like some kind of curiosity. Like I'm not just a person trying to do my job and live my life. So you just decided not to mention it? Maya asked. To everyone here? Most people here don't know. The clinic was founded through an anonymous trust. The staff knows I volunteer, but they think I'm just a doctor who wants to give back, and that's all I want to be. He looked at her intently. That's all I wanted to be with you. Just your doctor. Just someone trying to help. But we weren't just doctor and patient anymore, Maya said quietly. Were we? All those texts, those conversations, that felt like more than that. Something flickered across his face. You're right. And maybe that's where I really messed up. Because once it became more than just a professional relationship, I should have told you. I knew that. He trailed off, looking frustrated with himself. You just what? I liked how you saw me, he admitted. You didn't see the money or the family name. You just saw me. And I've never had that before. Not really. It was selfish and wrong, and I'm sorry. The anger that had been burning in Maya's chest for the past week flickered and dimmed. She could hear the genuine regret in his voice, see it in the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me? She asked. I complained to you about an $800 rent payment. I talked about not being able to afford a winter coat. You probably spend more than that on lunch. Actually, I usually eat protein bars in my car between shifts, he said with a slight humorless smile. And I know it sounds ridiculous for me to say this, but money doesn't solve everything. It doesn't make life less complicated, just complicated in different ways. At least it solves the problem of wondering if you can afford to eat this week. You're right. I'm sorry, that was a stupid thing to say. He rubbed his face with both hands. I'm not trying to claim my life is harder than yours. It's not. Obviously, I've had every advantage, every privilege. I know that. But that doesn't mean I understand any better how to connect with people. If anything, it makes it harder. Maya wanted to stay angry. It would be easier if she could just hate him, write him off as another rich person pretending to care. But sitting here, seeing how genuinely distressed he looked, she found her anger giving way to something more complicated. You should have told me, she said finally. I know. And I don't know if I can just pretend nothing's changed. Because everything has changed. The power dynamic, the way I see you, all of it. I understand. Dr. Hunt moved to sit in the chair he usually occupied during their appointments, but this time he looked smaller somehow, diminished. Do you want to transfer to a different doctor? I can make the arrangements. Make sure whoever takes over your case is fully briefed. The offer surprised her. He was giving her an out, no questions asked. Part of Maya wanted to take it, to run away from this messy situation and never look back. But a bigger part of her wasn't ready to walk away. I don't know what I want, she admitted. I'm angry and confused, and I feel stupid for not seeing it sooner. But she hesitated. I also don't think you were trying to hurt me. I think you were just trying to be normal for once. And I can understand that even if I don't like how you went about it. For what it's worth, everything I told you was true. He said quietly. The meal prep advice, the budget-friendly recipes, all of it. I do those things. Not because I have to, but because I work insane hours and I don't want to eat garbage. The food bank recommendation, the resources I shared, those were all things I genuinely thought would help you. I wasn't patronizing you or treating you like a charity case. Then what was I to you? The question hung in the air between them. Dr. Hunt looked at her for a long moment, and Maya could see him weighing his words carefully. You were someone who saw me as a person, he said finally. Someone I looked forward to seeing. Someone who made me remember why I became a doctor in the first place. Not for the money or the family legacy or any of that, but to actually help people. To make a difference in someone's life, even if it's just figuring out why they're tired all the time. Despite everything, Maya felt something warm unfurl in her chest. That's a nice answer. It's the truth. He leaned forward slightly. Maya, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but can we start over? Not forgetting what happened, but acknowledging it and moving forward? I promise no more secrets. Whatever you want to know about me, about my family, about any of it, I'll tell you. Maya considered this. It would be easier to walk away, to avoid the complicated mess of feelings that this situation had created. But she'd never been one to choose easy over right. Okay, she said slowly, but I need you to be honest with me. About everything. And I need to understand something. Anything. Why are you really here? At this clinic, I mean. You could be working anywhere. Doing anything. Why here? Dr. Hunt was quiet for a moment, and Maya could see him deciding how much to share. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. My younger sister died when she was 16. Chloe. She had what should have been a treatable infection, but she didn't tell anyone she wasn't feeling well. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it had progressed to sepsis. He paused, the pain still visible in his expression even though this had clearly happened years ago. We had all the money in the world, access to the best doctors, everything. But none of it mattered because she was scared to speak up. She thought she was being a bother. I'm so sorry, Maya whispered. After she died, I realized how many people don't get care because they're scared or they can't afford it, or they think their problems aren't important enough. The system is broken, and my family's company is part of that system. Making expensive medical equipment that saves lives but that most people can't afford to access. He looked directly at her. I can't fix the whole system, but I can run one clinic where people like you don't have to choose between their health and their rent, where no one has to die because they were afraid to ask for help. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. This wasn't what she'd expected. She'd imagined some kind of guilt-driven charity work or resume building, not genuine grief and purpose. That's why you never told anyone, she realized. Because you didn't want it to be about you or your money. You wanted it to be about the work. Exactly. He managed a small smile. Though clearly my plan to stay anonymous didn't work out so well. Well, your face is all over the internet in a suit that probably costs more than my car, Maya pointed out. So maybe work on your secret identity. He laughed, a real laugh this time, and some of the tension in the room eased. Noted. They sat in silence for a moment, and Maya realized that despite everything, she still felt comfortable with him. The anger had faded, replaced by a tentative understanding. He'd made a mistake by not telling her, but his reasons were more complicated than she'd initially thought. So where do we go from here? She asked. That depends on you, Dr. Hunt said. I meant what I said about transferring your care if you'd be more comfortable with someone else. But if you're willing to continue as your doctor, I'd like that. And if you're open to it, he hesitated, I'd like to continue being your friend too. Or whatever we were becoming. What were we becoming? Maya asked, her heart beating faster. I don't know, he admitted. But I'd like to find out. If you're willing. Maya thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal she'd felt. The understanding she'd gained. The way he'd opened up to her about his sister, trusting her with something deeply personal and painful. The way she still felt drawn to him despite all the complications. I'm willing to try, she said finally. But you have to promise me something. Anything. No more secrets. If something's important, you tell me, even if you think it'll change how I see you. Especially if you think it'll change how I see you. I promise. He held out his hand, and after a moment Maya shook it. His grip was warm and steady, and he held on just a second longer than necessary. Okay then, Maya said, pulling her hand back reluctantly. So what now? Do we actually do the medical appointment part of this appointment? Dr. Hunt glanced at his tablet, then back at her with a slightly sheepish expression. Honestly, we're already 20 minutes over schedule and there are 6 people waiting. But your blood work came back great. Keep doing what you're doing with the supplements. Come back in a month for a follow-up. Very professional, Maya teased and was rewarded with his smile. I try. He stood up, then paused at the door. Maya, thank you. For giving me a chance to explain. For listening. A lot of people wouldn't have. Yeah, well, you're lucky I'm curious. And stubborn. It's a dangerous combination. I'm starting to realize that. As Maya left the clinic that morning, she felt lighter than she had all week. Things weren't simple, and there were still complications to navigate. But for the first time since finding that article, she felt like maybe they could figure it out. Maybe different worlds could find a way to meet in the middle. Her phone buzzed as she walked to her car. A text from Dr. Hunt. "Thank you again for today. And since we're being honest about everything, I should probably tell you that I've been looking forward to our appointments way more than is probably professionally appropriate. Just so you know, Alexander." Maya stared at the message, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. He'd signed it Alexander this time, not Dr. Hunt, not even the initials, just his name. She saved his contact with the new name, then typed back, "Good to know I'm not the only one. See you in a month. Maya." As she drove to work, Maya couldn't stop smiling. Things were complicated and messy and nothing like what she'd expected, but somehow that made it feel more real, more honest, more like something that might actually have a chance. The next few weeks felt like walking a tightrope. Maya and Alexander, she was trying to think of him as Alexander now instead of Dr. Hunt, were figuring out what this new version of their relationship looked like. They texted more frequently and the conversations had shifted. Less about medical stuff, more about everything else. He told her about his day at the hospital where he also worked part-time, about difficult cases and small victories. She shared stories from the coffee shop, like the regular customer who always ordered a medium-large coffee, and got offended when Maya asked for clarification. They sent each other memes, complained about the weather, recommended music and podcasts. It felt normal, almost easy. But there was something unspoken hanging between them, a tension that made Maya's stomach flip every time her phone buzzed with his name. The complication came from an unexpected direction. Maya had finally landed a full-time job with benefits at a marketing firm downtown. It wasn't her dream job,